A single mother's letter, an erased hearing, an encrypted text from a federal judge. What Pam Bondi uncovered exposed the hidden legal system that protected the elite for years. There was no transcript. No docket. No clerk present. Just a closed door in a D.C. federal building and 5 men, documented associates of a transnational criminal network, quietly released from IC custody. No formal ruling. No written opinion. Just a voice, Judge James Boasberg. His words spoken off record, behind closed doors, unchallenged. Within 48 hours, the 5 men vanished. Federal agents were confused. Court staff had no idea a hearing even occurred. But one observer caught the moment, Pam Bondi. She wasn't assigned to the case. She was passing through. But what she witnessed, a sealed directive delivered verbally, without trace, left her stunned. She didn't run to the media. She made calls. Former clerks. DOJ contacts. A retired judge in Nevada. Each shared something similar, procedural anomalies that looked like bureaucratic quirks, until they weren't. A timeline began to form, one that couldn't be explained by backlog or error. Encrypted messages traced to signal. Files moved off calendar. Hearings reassigned to Boasberg's chambers without reassignment memos. Witness lists that evaporated. It was less conspiracy than coordination, a hidden lane through the justice system, accessible only to a select few. Bondi had questions. But nobody else seemed to. Not the FBI. Not the Judiciary Committee. Not the press. So she looked deeper. The first crack came from an internal signal log, metadata linking Boasberg to a network of private legal communicators. One message, flagged by a subpoenaed IT record, read, "They're planning to dump some of it in late March. But don't worry, Kyle, I've got it covered." Kyle was an alias. But behind it, Pam's team confirmed, was Boasberg. Still, no one moved. Until Bondi received the letter. It came from Brownsville, Texas. Handwritten. A mother's grief. Her son, an IC agent, was shot during an arrest. One of the suspects had previously been released by Boasberg under sealed order. "I'm not asking for revenge," the letter read. "I just want to know why a judge I've never seen can make decisions that no one questions, even when people end up in wheelchairs." Pam kept the letter in her desk. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about something far harder to defend. Silence. Pam Bondi knew the silence wasn't accidental. It was policy. A posture. She gathered her team, a small group of analysts, clerks, and legal aides not chosen for loyalty, but for precision. They weren't chasing headlines. They were tracking anomalies. The first step was timestamps. A routine cross-check of Boasberg's calendar against federal filings showed dozens of entries that had no corresponding case IDs. Meetings labeled consult or update, aligned with sudden changes in bond rulings, stay orders, and deferred detentions. But when they requested access logs from the Eastern District's secure archive system, 2 full weeks were missing. Not restricted. Not redacted. Missing. Deleted without authorization. Next came the hearings. Several involved national security claims, classified detentions, delayed subpoenas, digital surveillance cases. But one hearing stood out, docket #18-2291, marked as conducted, had a transcript file with 0 characters. No notes. No speakers. No stenographer. A court clerk from that division, granted anonymity, confirmed what Pam suspected. That hearing never happened. But the case moved forward like it did. Bondi didn't react outwardly. But internally, the shape of the system was changing. This wasn't a judge abusing discretion. It was a judge redesigning process. And the language, encrypted, delayed, vague, was the architecture of that design. What finally pulled it into the open wasn't metadata. It was a whistleblower. The aide, still unnamed, sent a single sentence to Bondi's encrypted tip line. "JB says we'll bury it in pretrial. No panic. No files go public unless forced." 3 days later, Judge Boasberg delayed discovery in a separate immigration-linked trafficking case. The press didn't notice. No one did. Except Bondi. In a closed-door meeting with DOJ ethics officials, she presented the evidence, meticulously. But she left out the letter. That wasn't for them. Later that night, she sat with her team and read it again. Her voice quiet. "We don't let this sit. Not this time." The next morning, hearings began closing without warning. Clerk schedules shifted. Bondi's staff were denied access to sealed motions they were previously cleared to view. And then came the warning, not formal, not written. Just a subtle message from a senior federal liaison. Pam. You've seen enough. Let this go. She didn't respond. Instead, she filed a formal request to the Office of Legal Counsel. Not a complaint, an inquiry. A signal to anyone watching that she wasn't bluffing. The next day, someone leaked the metadata packet to a reporter at Lawfare. They didn't print it. Not yet. But they called her. I'm not writing anything until you go first, the journalist said. Pam hung up and dialed a retired judge in Las Vegas, the only one who'd spoken honestly about Boasberg's reach. You sure about this, Pam? I am. You'll burn a lot of bridges. I'd rather burn a bridge than carry something this corrupt across it. The judge didn't argue. Because he understood what was coming next. Not exposure. Reckoning. They didn't think she'd go through with it. Not the Department of Justice. Not the federal judiciary. And certainly not Judge James Boasberg. But on an overcast morning in April, behind a closed press room door in downtown Washington, D.C., Pam Bondi stepped to the podium and read a statement that, until then, no sitting legal officer had dared to say out loud. We believe Judge James Boasberg has knowingly interfered with federal investigations, misused judicial authority to shield individuals from scrutiny, and compromised the integrity of the justice system. No adjectives. No spin. Just allegations, on the record, under her name. Then she filed the charges. Obstruction of justice. Willful concealment of evidence. Abuse of judicial authority. Failure to recuse from conflicts of interest. Within minutes, legal blogs exploded. CNN cut to live coverage. Reddit threads bloomed with theories. But the real impact was quieter. Government inboxes flooded with internal messages that began with variations of the same two words. She knows. For the first time in decades, a sitting federal judge wasn't just behind the bench, he was beneath scrutiny. Not hypothetically. Not reputationally. Formally. Publicly. Within 24 hours, the phrase, shadow justice, began trending. Bondi's team received thousands of messages. Some angry. Some afraid. But most were from people who had worked quietly within the system, clerks, aides, assistants, who had seen just enough to believe her. A Navy vet from Tampa wrote, I never thought I'd see the day a judge got called out. Thank you for reminding us the robe isn't sacred, it's earned. A paralegal in New Mexico wrote, I sat in that courtroom. I saw the delays. You're not wrong. But one letter was different. No return address. Just a line scrawled in shaky pen. I watched Judge Boasberg override a colleague in 2018 on an immigration hold. No one reported it. The man walked. 2 months later, he killed a sheriff's deputy in Arkansas. We all knew. No one spoke. Pam didn't release it publicly. She didn't need to. The details matched. As the days passed, congressional staffers started reaching out anonymously. Legal deans asked for comment. And in faculty lounges across the country, law professors rewrote syllabi to include a new phrase, judicial insulation. Boasberg, meanwhile, offered only a single response, typed by his clerk, distributed by fax. Judge Boasberg has always served with honor and integrity and will respond through the appropriate legal channels. No denial. No press conference. No video. To the public, that wasn't professionalism. It was evasion. Outside the courthouse, quiet protests began. Not chants. Just presence. Signs held by law students, veterans, and public defenders. Seal the truth, lose the people. Whose court is this? No more shadow justice. Pam didn't attend. She didn't lead rallies. She didn't do interviews. She worked. Because this wasn't a campaign. It wasn't a vendetta. It was a question that had echoed silently for years inside legal offices and court hallways. Who exactly is watching the judges? And now, finally, someone was. When James Boasberg finally entered the Harrisburg courtroom, escorted by U.S. Marshals, flanked by counsel, gray suit pressed and collar tight, he didn't look disgraced. He looked composed. And exhausted. The gallery expected silence, or maybe arrogance. What they got instead was a man prepared to say what no one imagined he would. I've made mistakes. But not for the reasons people think. The reporters froze. Not because it was dramatic. But because it wasn't. Boasberg spoke plainly. No legalese. No deflection. He said he sealed hearings to buy time, rerouted cases to avoid implosions, and deleted records because certain systems weren't built for public exposure. He said it wasn't about criminals. It was about stability. That word hung in the air: clinical, bureaucratic, dangerous. I didn't protect bad actors, he added. I protected the structure. When it was about to break, there was no apology, no anger. Just a controlled admission that stunned the courtroom more than any outburst ever could. Because it wasn't just a confession. It was a justification. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She'd heard enough behind closed doors, judges whispering about national security, about preserving institutions. Even if it bends the law. But Boasberg wasn't bending. He'd become the hinge. The public didn't know how to react. Overnight, opinions split. Some said Boasberg had done what others wouldn't, shoulder the burden of imperfection. Others saw something colder. He thinks silence is noble, one former clerk tweeted. But it was never his silence to offer. It was ours. And he took it. Bondi stayed off camera. No comment. No narrative. Because the real evidence wasn't words, it was the files. Her team had unlocked sealed transcripts. Court dates with missing witnesses. Encrypted logs sent before decisions were announced. But one transcript changed everything. It referenced a 2022 surveillance case. According to the official docket, a classified hearing had been held with a key intelligence witness. The transcript? Blank. Fabricated. The hearing never happened. No one had noticed. Not DOJ. Not the Oversight Board. Until now. Bondi didn't need to say anything. The revelation landed like a seismic shift. For the first time, the fear moved away from one judge and toward the system itself. Because if one judge could erase a hearing, and nobody noticed, it meant the checks were never there. And the silence wasn't just complicity. It was infrastructure. The trial had already made headlines, encrypted messages, altered transcripts, rerouted cases. But what came next shifted the story from exposure to implication. Because the final encrypted message, quietly released by the DOJ as part of discovery, contained 2 letters that changed everything. If she pushes discovery, it all falls. JB says delay 90 days, and keep WH out of it. 2 letters. 1 suggestion. WH. The White House. No direct names. No timestamps on the message. But the metadata confirmed the sender was a judicial liaison. And the implication was clear: this wasn't just a rogue judge stalling justice. It was coordinated. Pam Bondi, as always, didn't flinch. No outburst. Just a single line during a midnight press call with a journalist who'd been following the case since day one. If this is what justice looks like when no one's watching, then maybe it's time we start watching. The internet seized on the quote instantly. Within 48 hours, national media declared this more than a judicial crisis. It was now a constitutional fracture. A senior DOJ official resigned. A Senate subcommittee launched an emergency inquiry. And then came the internal memo. Leaked. Unredacted. Flagged. Priority: internal judicial liaison. It referred to synchronized shielding between bench and executive branches. Initialed JB. Inside the courtroom, Boasberg's posture shifted. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His defense team requested a recess. Denied. Then a 30-day delay. Also denied. Because now, the case wasn't just about classified hearings or encrypted signals. It was about intent. And more than that, collusion. Suddenly, the conversation moved beyond legal circles. Ethics panels convened. A former appellate judge broke silence on national television. We all saw him consolidate power. We thought he was being efficient. The phrase stuck. Efficient justice. But underneath it, something else emerged: emails, quietly submitted by a junior attorney as supplemental evidence. One referenced the 2019 immigration case. The subject line: flag for JB. The body: sensitive affiliations. Confirmed delay via alternate channel. The alternate channel? Signal. Until this moment, everything had been shadows. Now there were fingerprints. Names. Protocols. And then came the tipping point. Pam Bondi subpoenaed a former judicial aide to testify. Not a prosecutor. Not a partisan. Just someone who had quietly watched. The moment she stepped into the courtroom, no cameras followed her. Her name was redacted from public record. But her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, measured, devastating. He told us, if it risks the wrong names getting exposed, bury it in procedure. Silence fell. Then stillness. She testified that hearings had been preempted by directive. That rulings were often dictated before arguments were made. That some case files were altered after outcomes were agreed upon. And then she said the words that would land on the front page of every newspaper. It wasn't about justice. It was about control. That moment changed everything. Not because of what it revealed, but because of what it confirmed. This wasn't neglect. It was design. It came faster than expected. After 9 days of testimony and less than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Their faces unreadable. Their decision clear. Judge James Boasberg was found guilty on 2 counts. Willful concealment of evidence. Abuse of judicial authority. Not a media spectacle. No shouting in the courtroom. No gasps. Just a verdict read aloud, and a man who had once ruled over hundreds of cases now standing silently, disbarred, removed from the bench, denied further judicial immunity. There was no jail sentence. No final address. No statement to the court. He exited through a side door, escorted by U.S. Marshals. Cameras waited outside. He didn't stop. Pam Bondi didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She remained in her seat, eyes fixed forward, face neutral. When it ended, she stood, nodded once, and walked out. Reporters trailed behind her, some shouting questions, others just observing. One caught up near the courthouse steps. "Was it worth the backlash?" they asked. She paused only a moment, then answered. "Justice doesn't collapse in loud moments. It rots in quiet ones. And I refuse to stay quiet." That line spread in hours. Social media clipped it into 15-second reels. Protesters printed it on cardboard signs. One senator quoted it during a late-night filibuster on judicial oversight reform. But more importantly, agencies responded. Within 2 weeks, the Administrative Office of U.S. Courts launched a national audit of sealed federal rulings. Dozens of older cases, previously dismissed for lack of standing, were reopened. Oversight measures long considered invasive were implemented. A federal task force was formed to review encrypted communication policies across all Article 3 judges. But none of that changed what the country now understood. This hadn't been one man operating in isolation. This had been a structure built to forget. A system that treated silence as standard, that allowed certain names to pass untouched through proceedings simply because they were well-placed or inconvenient. It was more than corruption. It was erosion. And Pam Bondi had forced the system to look at itself. She gave no victory speech. She didn't accept speaking engagements. She declined an invitation to testify before Congress. Instead, she returned to her desk. The letter from Brownsville still in the drawer. The mother's words echoing louder now than ever. "I just want to know why a judge I've never seen can make decisions that no one questions, even when people end up in wheelchairs." Bondi had made sure the question was asked. Now the country had to decide if it wanted to hear the answer. The headlines moved on. But the system didn't. In the months after the verdict, federal agencies initiated mandatory reviews of sealed court actions. Over 900 cases flagged for audit. Dozens linked back to Judge Boasberg's chambers. Some were small, quiet immigration delays, technical warrant rejections. Others weren't. A 2018 surveillance case involving classified foreign communications was reopened. A 2021 suppression ruling, previously sealed, was quietly reversed. And a 2020 ruling tied to financial fraud was found to have been influenced by unauthorized consultation. Not reversed. Not erased. Just exposed. Bondi didn't comment. She wasn't the story anymore. But others were. A clerk in Houston came forward. Then a retired appellate aide from Denver. A circuit court analyst from Los Angeles sent an encrypted transcript log to the press. No charges, no accusations, just data. Each document added a pixel to the picture. Sealed rulings weren't the exception. They were an ecosystem. Built not always with malice, but with convenience. And in that convenience, accountability drowned. Legal panels assembled. White papers circulated. Academic journals debated terms like administrative insulation and procedural autonomy. But none of the essays answered the quiet, growing fear. How much of the law was still law, and how much had become habit. It was a legal question, but it felt moral. Bondi stayed out of it. Until another hearing was scheduled, this time in a mid-sized federal courtroom in Tallahassee. Not high profile. Not televised. Just another routine suppression motion. Except this time, something happened. A defense attorney requested a sealed sidebar. The judge refused. He cited new oversight policy and referenced the Boasberg case by name. The moment landed like a signal. Quiet. Procedural. But clear. The culture had shifted. Not because the verdict had changed everything. It hadn't. But because it had changed one thing. The assumption that no one was watching. Pam Bondi was never sworn into public office again. She returned to private practice, declining interviews and speaking fees. She taught 2 law seminars, gave one off-the-record lecture at Yale, and disappeared from national conversation. But one quote, her quiet answer on the courthouse steps, did not fade. Justice doesn't collapse in loud moments. It rots in quiet ones. That line etched itself into judicial ethics manuals. It was quoted during confirmation hearings. Carved quietly into a marble bench outside a law school library in Richmond. But the moment that said everything came not from Washington, not from the media, and not from Bondi herself. It came from a hearing in Phoenix, Arizona. A motion to suppress. The defense cited a prior ruling from Judge Boasberg. The judge read it. Then paused. And said softly, but into the official record, "This court declines to follow precedent set in silence." No one applauded. The courtroom moved on. But outside, the air felt different. Because this wasn't a story about Pam Bondi. Or about Boasberg. It was about what happens when we stop believing that power is watching itself. And what begins when someone decides to look anyway.